Back to the 65 and 69 Princeton reverbs that came in. I'm just about done. I'm waiting on some new output tubes for this one, the 65. The old RCAs were mismatched by 20%, which meant one of them was beginning to not draw any current. In addition to the mismatch, after about 5 minutes of being on, one of the tubes was getting very hot and the other one was not getting very warm at all, which is a pretty good sign that it is time for some new output tubes before something calamitous happens. It's got a test pair of tubes in for right now while I wait for the new electroharmonics to arrive. Just as an overview, I took everything off the front panel and cleaned the front panel, redid some of the solder joints like this one down here, and there was some very noisy resistors on the input jacks, and the solder joint here was broken, so it's got some new resistors there and all reflowed. It's got new cathode bypass caps. Let's see, it has a new cap here. It had a generic silver mica here, here, and here, so that's the 250, that's the 500, that's the 10. It had a film 10 nanofarad cap here instead of the correct 20 nanofarad, so it's got a ceramic 20 nanofarad like it originally had. Here's the matching one that's original to the amp. It's fine. This cathode resistor here was measuring like 4.9K. It's supposed to be 3.7K, so that was way out of spec, so that's been changed out. The tremolo was working, but the minimum speed was very, very fast. And when I measured the three original ceramic disc caps here, the 20 measured about 12, and the two 10s measured about 7. And so it just wasn't nearly getting as fast as it originally, wasn't getting as slow as it originally did. So these are the Muratas that I like. They're 1,000 kilovolt, so 22 nanofarad, 1010. And the tremolo, the vibrato is back to its original speed range. And I added another 1 meg across this resistor here, the 1 meg, 500K net result, which increases the depth of the tremolo in a Princeton. It's a nice little subtle mod. If this were an otherwise untouched example, I might not have done that, but it's, you can remove the new resistor if you want to go back to the original, more limited depth, but I've never had a client not like this. The biggest change that may get some panties in a twist is while the original can cap, well, it's actually a C distribution replacement that had failed, is physically in the amp, both so that from the outside it looks like it has the old cap, and so no one can put their little fingers in there and get zapped. Instead of installing a new multi-section can cap, I put in this little tag board mounted off two stainless steel standoffs, aluminum standoff, stainless steel hardware. So two very neat, evenly spaced holes added to the chassis. Allowed me to use this terminal board with four Nishikon 22 microfarad 450 volt caps, rated for 105 degrees Celsius, like 12,000 hour life, very reliable. We got a 1K, 18K, and 18K using some 2-watt Vishay metal films. So basically doing exactly what Leo wanted, just doing it a little bit smarter. And in the future, if this thing needs to be recapped in 20 plus years, the radials will still be on the market. Here you can see the added 2.2 meg across lugs 1 and 2 of the bias tremolo intensity pot. The tremolo intensity pot. This is the bias here. This is the output of the tremolo circuit, and this feeds the grid of the output tubes. So if this pot were to fail, there would still be a reference to the bias for those output tubes. Another potential pearl clutcher, I changed the layout to the bias supply. So there's a well-supported, secured trim pot here. So that's a 10K trim pot, 22K here, taking the place of the old 27K that was fixed. So the cap's in place here, 100K, 2-watt metal film, a nice new diode back there, and you can see the two added half-watt metal film, 1%, 100 ohms there for the heater balance. Beyond that, I installed a new longer power cable, grounded properly. I've shown that in a lot of videos with a longer safety ground than the hot and neutral. The hot goes to the fuse, then to the power switch, and the neutral is tied to the other primary here with the old otherwise unused ground switch. There is no death cap on the ground switch anymore. Had to clean a few tube sockets, had to clean 2 of the pots, I think, and I cleaned up the contacts on the input jack. And right now, with a temporary tank attached to my shop cab, now you might have heard that there's a little bit of hum if I turn the reverb up. That's endemic to Princeton's, and I want to talk to the owner about that right after he sees this video. One of the reasons that hum is present is because the reverb transformer derives its power from the screen node, so it only has 2 small amounts of filtering. And if I were to tie it to this otherwise unused node here between the 2 18Ks, so this one and this one, so actually right here, tie it to this 18K rather than to the screen supply, you'd have that much more filtering, and that hum would go away on the reverb. That happens a lot on Princeton's, and it's my preference to do that, but that means that one of the original wires, which is actually snaked beneath the board down here, needs to be disconnected at one end and either replaced entirely or have this end disconnected and then do a splice to another bit of wire running over here rather than running over here. It's easier to understand and conceptually than following the twisty-turny wires. But it gives the same sound. You're not going to notice any difference in the sound of the reverb that you want. It just takes away that hum. So that's the 65. It's got a new speaker that'll be here in a day or two. It's getting a G10C from WGS, and the 69 is going to get the ET10. That way the owner can try either or both speakers with either amp and see if he has a clear preference. You can't go wrong with either speaker for Princeton, but for some people, one speaker versus the other might be a bit more right for what they hear in their head. I'm really pleased with this. Aside from the hum, if I turn up the reverb, you can barely tell the amp is on. It's just so quiet and wonderful. This is just pure goodness. So let's see how the 69 compares. Same increase in noise as I turn up the reverb. A little less, but still there. It's always good to change the reverb supply when possible. When the owner approves. Hopefully he will. Anyway, it's sounding almost interchangeable with the 65. People give these red caps a hard time in the forums, and the later blue ones as well, and it's because people don't know what they're looking at. They don't see that, oh, these boards can get DC buildup, or the later ones get a lot of DC buildup in the wax. They just see, hey, what's different? Okay, the early ones had blue, these have red, or the early ones had the blue Ajax molded, the later ones have the large, shiny blue ones. Well, they're shiny when they're not all covered in dirty wax. These caps are absolutely great. The later blue blobs are absolutely great. The blue Ajax are great. You know, they didn't use these red ones very long throughout the entire amp, but, you know, even the black-faced era use certain ones of these. The 100 nanofarad on the output of the vibrato channel was always one of these red ones. They're fine. It's a visual thing which coincided with other changes, but most guitar players and people who like to type furiously on forums, they don't know what they're really seeing. They just see a color change, or, you know, they're like, hey, this amp's got a problem. Must be because they used a red cap instead of a blue cap. Anyway, I digress. This thing's fantastic. Let's take a look at what all I did. All right, the input jack on this one, none of the hardware was really tight on this amp, and these had twisted around, and this resistor had broken right here. It's broken free. It was just resting in place. So these have been cleaned, retightened, resoldered, everything double checked. All the knobs came off, all the pots were tightened, the rear jacks, reverb stuff, the RCA connectors, all that was loose. All that has been fixed. Both amps had the typical DC buildup, especially right here, where the 500 picofarad meets the 20 nanofarad right there. That close eyelet to the B+. They both cleaned up pretty easily with some alcohol and some heat. Both amps have new cathode bypass caps installed. In this case, all the original caps measure just fine and are still there, so I didn't have to change any of these out. The original tremolo caps are still in place. They're still measuring and working just fine. Did the same 1 meg in parallel with 1 meg mod to this because it's a good thing. It's easily reversible. Same deal with the filter cap replacement, same deal with the new dropping resistors. It just makes sense. And the same changed bias layout. And in this case, I didn't have to change out the power cable. Power cable install wasn't terrible. I had a good quality Hakko connector, good quality cable. I did solder all the grounds to chassis as opposed to the hardware for the power transformer, because all the power transformer bolts were loose, which almost always happens. I still need to change the fuse wiring, neaten it up a little bit, the fuse and switch wiring a little bit. I've got to do that. And I'm waiting for some bear trap retainers. I ordered 6, and they only shipped 2. Just having lots of fun with the vendors these days. I don't know why. And like the other one, it'd be nice if the reverb hum was gone, so the owner and I will speak after this video. And I always get asked about the cable glands that I install when I change out a power cable. This is the traditional Hakko right here, which works quite well, but you have to have either a special tool to get that off or the patience of a saint, and most people don't have either, and these things get all chewed up and the chassis gets all scratched. And even when properly installed and when properly removed, they're difficult to use, and they're putting all the force just in this direction, just squeezing from one direction, and the cable gets deformed, and it's never really that rock solid in there. These, because it's squeezing and compressing a clamp inside, see if you can see that. Yeah. These apply force equally from all sides of the cable, and when they're installed, they're really rock solid. There's no movement at all. It'd be very difficult for them to come off unless you want them to. And they are also made by Hakko. They come in different sizes. This is one for a slightly smaller gauge cable. And they sell one that fits these big ones. This one, you only need a 1/2-inch chassis hole. And the one that fits this cable, you need a 0.625-inch chassis hole, sometimes larger. Anyway, the smaller version with a 1/2-inch from Mauser, it is part number 836-M3207. Manufacturer's part number for Hakko is M3207. It is a Hakko cable gland, strain relief, and core grip, ROHS compliant. And I buy huge bags of these. They also come in different sizes. So go to Mauser, find that one, look at the data sheet, and then you can find the inner diameter to match the cable that you have that you want to use. You can use the heavier duty stuff. You can use the lighter stuff. You know, I'm talking 16 gauge versus 18 gauge. And for an 8-9 foot cable on an amp that only draws 1 amp, you know, it's really not a big deal to use this with a smaller cable than this. This is a bit overkill, but that's for another video. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, when the 69 came in, the reverb was very weak. And poking around, I found that in 1969, they'd never bothered to connect the blue wire or install the blue wire from pin 6 to pin 1. So for the past 55 years, only half the 12AT7 was driving the reverb tank. So now I've added a blue wire connecting the plates of both triodes, and the entire 12AT7 is now driving the reverb tank. Gotta love those CBS changes. Anyway, this is how the two amps, the 65 and the 69, are looking and sounding and performing now. And you can see what's been done and what I would like to do still with changing the reverb supply node that does change it from the vintage circuit to something which is actually better. And you have to remember that Leo did not want the Princeton to be as the best it possibly could. He wanted it to be just so good so that you'd want to buy a deluxe reverb. And the deluxe reverb only had to be so good so that you would want to buy a super or a twin. It was a vertical marketing concept, which was very sensible. But there are some things in the Princeton circuit which were deliberately kind of handicapped in order to make the deluxe reverb to have a much bigger, fuller, more immediate sound, et cetera, and the twin than the deluxe, et cetera. So there's always a compromise in a deluxe compared to a twin. There's always a compromise in a Princeton compared to a deluxe. And without changing the essence of what makes a Princeton great, just moving that node for the reverb so the reverb hum goes away, that's a no-brainer. But it is not my decision to make because it is not my amp. Anyway, I'm rambling. I've been working on so many things the past 2 weeks, and this is the first video I've had time to make. I'm out of practice. Anyway, thanks for watching. I mean that. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.